You know who made a campaign stop on the Joe Rogan podcast Friday night. There's a lot of fake news coming up, so we're going to clear some of it up as it happens.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger,
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
That's a slogan, we should put that on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy.
Hey Roger, how you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Let me start the episode off by asking you a question. Have you ever seen a MAGA hat in the wild?
Do you know, it's funny because I did have in the pipeline to ask you a question, and I might leverage your question to jump straight to my question, which is, you know, maybe it was probably about a year ago, you cooked up some like merch for the middle, right?
Yeah.
And you like got like a custom design MAGA hat, except instead of Make America Great Again, it was Make the Middle Great Again.
Yeah.
And I think you were pretty excited. Like, I think you thought it was like good. It looked good. It was like,
Well, there's some good feedback from it as well.
but I think I kind of like deflated your bubble a little bit because I was like, I'm not wearing that. and so I was going to ask you in this episode, how did you feel about that? Like, how did you feel like you'd made this like epic hat? And like, not only did you design it, but you bought a copy for me, and I just like shat on it. I didn't even wear it or anything. But because the reason I was going to ask you about this is because I felt, to some extent at least, this was kind of an example of like, you know, for me, it's like I can't wear this like someone. So and just for the record, this hat, genuinely, like, you'd have to have a second look to like realize that it isn't actually the genuine authentic MAGA hat, right? Like 99 out of 100 would actually think, oh, he's got a MAGA hat on. Anyway, and I said, I can't wear this. Like, I just can't do it.
Yeah, look.
How did you feel about that?
Well, at the time when I made that hat, I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was such a funny joke. And I must admit, it was before all the rhetoric. Obviously, Trump hadn't had the nomination yet. It was a very different world, right? The stakes were a lot lower. It was just a funny kind of meme, right? And this was before I found out you had Trump derangement syndrome as well. So I didn't even really know the sensitivities about it. I thought it was just another funny cultural thing. When you said that you didn't want to wear it or you didn't feel comfortable wearing it, I thought that was just like Andy being a bit worried what other people think kind of thing. I don't want people think I'm like a real MAGA person. But for me, I kind of like that was part of the fun.
You know, maybe I put a higher cost to, you know, the odd person genuinely mistaking me for a Donald Trump fan. Like, you know, for me, like, I'd shudder at the thought of that.
In Australia, you're probably right. I think in Sydney, like, people actually have lost their jobs, lost friendships from being like a MAGA cap wearing fanatic.
Firstly, to like answer your question, have I seen like a genuine, authentic, like someone wearing it in the wild? I can't say that I have. I mean, on one level, you'd say, well, that's not unsurprising, given we're not in America. But like, I did, you know, just recently come back from America, and I'm just trying to think if I saw anyone wear it there, and I don't specifically remember, but I wouldn't be surprised if I saw like a Trump T-shirt or something like that. But I don't recall seeing like the iconic red hat, you know, kind of thing.
I must admit, I've actually seen. I'd never seen anyone wearing a hat for ages, the whole of last year. But now I'm seeing a few hats. There was a hat on the metro the other day, and I've seen actually, funnily enough, some Gen Z looking youngsters wearing them.
Are they doing it ironically though?
It's hard to tell, but even that actually communicates a different message, like a change in tone, a change in what Donald Trump means to the public. Right, like I think it's moving away from certain things. But I have seen actually some older people wearing it as well. Like, I've probably seen maybe like half a dozen. So I'm not trying to overinflate the fact that there are truckloads of people wearing MAGA hats in Sydney. But like I said, I went the whole of last year not seeing any. And of course, we were outside of an election cycle, maybe, but still. So something in the air has changed around, you know, being brave enough for these people to wear MAGA hats in public spaces.
If I saw someone under the age of 50 wear a MAGA hat, my prize would be that they're just trolling.
But I think so too. But that also changes things, right? Like, I don't think even that was as acceptable, or well, maybe not acceptable, but like it was actually funny to do that. But now it has put more kindling, more fuel on the fire of Trump is actually just a really funny meme guy.
Today we're going to talk about the election because it is the last one we'll be releasing before the actual election.
I thought you were going to say it was the last election we've ever had.
Oh, well, it probably will be. Either way, I think we should do a bit of a tour of some of the things that have happened over the past week or so in these like dying hours of the campaign. And we had a bit of a chat. We had a couple of chats actually over the week about Donald Trump's appearance on Joe Rogan. And of course, we had an episode about Joe Rogan only a few episodes ago. Plus, it's sort of it is something we've been talking about more generally on the podcast in the context of the election. So, at the risk of reliving our conversations on the phone, where do you want to start with Joe Rogan and Donald Trump?
Well, I think so. Our conversation centered around a very different take on how the Joe Rogan podcast with Donald Trump was conducted by our friend Rogan, and also perhaps the performance and significance of it all. For those who don't know much about Joe Rogan, like, I don't think you can underestimate his reach and his influence on podcast culture. And this is fast turning into a podcast election in a lot of ways, right? This is actually the first election where podcasts have been used extensively by both sides of politics. So look, I think that it is a landmark kind of episode for all podcasts. Now, whether that influence extends out of the podcast universe is questionable, but that's something that you kind of never know. I just really think that this is one of those moments that actually makes people who don't listen to podcasts kind of tune in as well. So I think it's also an opportunity to bring focus to the medium itself, right? But probably not the best. Like, the draw probably doesn't have the payoff, especially for people who are not used to long format podcasts. They will just be turned off by the conversational ramblings, 3-hour ramblings between two men. But I think overall, you can't turn around, in my opinion, and say that it's a bad thing to give a candidate a platform for an unscripted 3-hour conversation. I think that you do learn a lot. It gives you a lot of data points. It gives you a chance to kind of submerge yourself into their stream of consciousness, right? Which is what the JRE, or the Joe Rogan Experience, is always aimed at doing, right? Now, what I would say is that the way it came about was a bit funny, because before Trump was confirmed, late last week, the prevailing thought was that Kamala Harris had booked it, and there was no discussion about Trump. In fact, there were previous comments from Rogan himself saying, I've had offers to have Trump on, but I've never taken it because I don't really want to help the guy. So for a while there, and we had phone calls about that it was looking like Kamala was going to do it, and who knows whether Rogan was going to bring Trump on. And then, in a weird twist of fate, Trump went on first, right? And now it looks like Kamala may or may not do it, but probably she won't. And since then, Rogan has also released officially that the reason that it didn't go ahead as scheduled was that they couldn't meet on terms, right? And that's caused controversy in itself. The Kamala campaign managers wanted Rogan to fly out to her and only do 1 hour, and he thought it would be best for the show to kind of treat her like any other guest and come to Austin, Texas, to his studio and do a regular, record, which can be anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. So, yeah, I don't know. You would never guess that this would be a major, part of a campaign, their appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast.
Okay, well, there's a little bit in there to respond to. So I think, first of all, maybe the last comment, I thought it would be a big part of the campaign, but I think it's actually dissipated and it didn't land. It didn't have the impact that I thought it probably would. I think in my mind, I thought, there's going to be so much more out of the Joe Rogan kind of guest appearance certainly for Donald Trump, but, for both candidates. And it just, he just did the rambling 3 hours interview, and unless you are a Joe Rogan listener, it would have been dead shit boring. I don't think it elicited any of the, if you take the top 10 most crazy things Trump has said in this whole campaign, I don't know that he necessarily said them on the Joe Rogan podcast. So it wasn't the highlights reel wasn't necessarily, that notable. And most people kind of aren't going to sit through a 3-hour podcast. So for me, I was probably a little bit surprised that it was less significant in terms of like a moment in the campaign than what I think it ended up being. But
do you think it helped him?
Well, I look, I guess if the question is, did he win votes or lose votes? He definitely won votes, but it's hard to say how many votes, because it's hard to say how many people, like, of all the people listening to Joe Rogan, I think you've got a bit of a mixed bag there, right? You've got people who listen to Joe Rogan just out of curiosity, but they don't take it seriously and would never be influenced by anything, I guess, said on Joe Rogan. You have diehards who really respect Joe Rogan, who maybe are open-minded, but then maybe they're kind of already formed like a view, like they've already got a worldview that because they're such like Joe Rogan fans or whatever, that they're quite opinionated. Then you've got another group who just probably, into MMA and are not going to vote either way because they don't care about politics, right? So you've got like quite a diverse range of people in his audience. So it's hard to say how many, but I want to touch on, we had a whole conversation about like Kamala Harris, the terms and I think I commented something to the effect of like, it's a little bit like absurd that you have this podcaster who is suggesting that the vice president should come to his dungeon in Austin, Texas, and take a whole day out of her campaign, listen, only a few days before the actual election day, to come for a whole day and do a 3-hour or 4-hour podcast with him. Whereas I think it's quite reasonable, like the suggestion that like maybe they can come up with some alternative, right? Rather than the, universe revolving around Joe Rogan, that maybe he accepts his place in the solar system a little bit more graciously, and goes and meets Kamala in wherever the fuck she was. And I get like the like if you're a Joe Rogan fan, like you would say, oh no, like this is how it is, like it's take it or leave it, like she's got to go to Austin, she's got to do it that way, it's got to be this long for. But come on, like the rest of the world don't operate on like Joe Rogan time. So anyway,
it wouldn't be Joe Rogan experience then, though.
Well, see, this is the thing, right? Like Kamala Harris hasn't come out and said, Joe Rogan will not come and meet me. This is outrageous. I should be allowed on this podcast on my terms. How ridiculous. We have to remember, like, this is the other way around. This is Joe Rogan saying, well, I wanted to have her on, but like she wouldn't agree to do it unless, like I wanted her to do it this way, but she only agreed to do it that way. Like, so this narrative that like, somehow like she is the one being difficult is to me like a bit hard to swallow, right? Like because it's like she doesn't have to do it, right?
I think you got it backwards, man. The reason why Rogan had to release those tweets was because he was getting accusations that he only offered it to Trump. He's kind of defending the position that the offer was there under the same terms he gives to all of his guests and the same terms that the other candidate, Trump, accepted. And in some ways, you have to have it exactly the same for the two candidates, right? Otherwise, he will be kind of judged on that respect, that he's giving bias to one side.
But whether that's the case or not, at the end of the day, what she's done essentially is politely declined the opportunity, right?
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to that. Let's follow that through, because I think this is the meat of it, right? In my mind, it's not about scheduling for her. It's about the risk of going on the JRE and being able to hold a conversation for 3 hours and still coming out of that in a positive light. I do not believe for a second it's scheduling. You thought it was scheduling. So I want to kind of get your view on it.
This is like a multifaceted question, right? There's literally scheduling, as in my calendar does not give me enough hours to make this thing happen, so I can't do it. And then there's scheduling, which, and to be clear, I don't think it's that, because you can make space for things, right? But the question is like, is this worth my time? Like, is this worth me getting on a plane for, I don't know how many hours it is, but let's say 4 hours down to Texas, and then 3 hours in the studio in Austin, and then another 3 hours back. So that's like, like that's a whole day, right? Effectively. And I think there's opportunity costs when you're making strategic decisions about whether you want to do something or not. So when I say scheduling, or when I like talk about it in the context of, she's obviously prepared to do it for 1 hour, but like I think that's because in that context it can make sense, because well, look, I can do this, I can do it the light touch version of Rogan and get it done. Yeah, that's fine. Like reach that audience or whatever. But like the payoff for me going down to Austin into his world and getting grilled about how vaccines kill children and all this stuff is not worth her while, right? And so maybe there's a little bit more common ground between us in the sense that I think you're saying that, well, it's a strategic decision not to do it, and the whole scheduling thing is just like an excuse or whatever. And I see it less cynically. Like, I think it's less that it's just like a fake reason that she doesn't want to do it. Like, for me, it's more that they've just made a call that, look, it's not worth our while, right? It's not like the 60 Minutes thing where the default expectation for many, many years of tradition is that both candidates go on 60 Minutes and do this interview, and it's almost like by omission that you haven't done it is quite like bizarre. This isn't that situation. So in some ways, like, maybe yes, Rogan's come out and said these are the reasons why, because he was getting some backlash or whatever. I don't follow that, but like, it's not like they've put out there this information that, well, Joe Rogan didn't meet my terms, I wanted him to come up, but he refused to. Like, they haven't put that information out there. That's Joe Rogan that's put it out there.
Yeah, no, I understand. I don't think it's cynical, but I think it's rational based on all the data points that you have that actually she has proven that she is bad on the stump in an unscripted format. And there is also a risk on Rogan's side that the campaign will treat it the same way that they did with the Fox interview with Brett Baer, where they were meant to give him an hour. They showed up late and they only gave like 20-something minutes, right? And a lot of that then made it into a really combative, like, I need you to get to the point. I can't let you filibuster. And it's a totally different show than what Joe Rogan can do, right? He's the wrong person to do that kind of thing. And look, I think at the point is most people will not sit through the full 3 hours. I wish they would, but they probably won't. And now all that you're left with is that Trump did it, Kamala turned it down, and most people suspect, because they've seen it with their own eyes, that the reason she turned it down is because she's not good off the cuff.
I think Kamala Harris is running to a different, rubric of success here, right, than Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump is good off the cuff to Trump voters, right? So, like, in the sense that he says what kind of, for whatever reason, tickles their fancy to vote for him, right? So by that sort of more objective measure, he's good off the cuff, you might like to say. But if you held Donald Trump to the same rubric of success as what Kamala Harris is held to, which is that basically anything controversial that she says, like, she's going to get pilloried for it, right? Or any slight slip up in the way she speaks or whatever, she's going to get, like, Donald Trump just doesn't get held to that standard, right? So he can go on Joe Rogan, and he's got the added like benefit of being like kind of like a little bit broy anyway, right? Which is, Joe Rogan's a very broy sort of environment, right? So he can kind of like pass off in that, right? Where she's going to come in and she's going to be this, like, all the biases are at play here. Like, she's this like this wokester, well, she's a woman, so she doesn't obviously get like, our culture of the, what this show's all about. And like,
he has heaps of women on. He has heaps of women on.
No, but we talked about on our Rogan episode how his listeners are predominantly like bros, right?
But that's who she needs to win over.
Again, this is like the cost benefit assessment, right? I'm a little bit skeptical of like armchair pundits saying, oh, well, she should have got on this because this is the group she needs to win. I mean, they've considered that, right? The campaign's considered that, and they've got a lot of different data points, a lot of different factors they're considering, and they've made a decision not to do it. Now, I think, after the election, they might, someone might come out with some like, oh, here's some data point proving that, if she'd done like, 2 basis points better with Joe Rogan listeners, she might have won it or something, and then you go, oh, well, okay, I guess she would have done it. But there's like a whole bunch of different factors that they're looking at, and they've made the strategic decision that that's not where they should put their chips, right? So
yeah, I agree, but I think it's because of the risk around the.
Yeah, of course it's risky, because like the thing is, like, the whole dynamic of this campaign right now is you've got this cohort of like people who tend to be, the people that Donald Trump's courting, right? Which like, to be honest, probably aligns relatively closely with Joe Rogan listeners, which are kind of apathetic young men who aren't really politically engaged, don't really have strong views of policy necessarily, but they've got strong views about other things like, woke stuff and, that whole kind of, like the identity of being like what it is to be like a man sort of thing, and they're very engaged in that space, right? But they don't tend to vote, whereas she's courting like women who are angry about abortion rights. And that's a group that does vote. And so for her, the calculus is, do I spend more time courting this vote that's probably going to be cynical of me to begin with, and I'm going to lose time that I could be spending on this other cohort, as in women who care about, their reproductive rights. Like that's not a good trade-off, right, for her and for the campaign. So I think that's why she hasn't done it. But I do want to get onto the next bit, because I think we've got quite a bit of territory to cover this episode, which is the actual podcast itself. Because I was like fuming
you were.
At like the first 20 seconds of it. I think I was like, messaging you. What did you think of the actual interview?
I'm going to bring up this message you sent me because it made me really laugh. It's like a real-time commentary. And so we both jumped on the podcast pretty quick. And then literally within minutes, you said, "Oh man, Rogan already sucking his cock." Literally the open. And okay, how I thought about it. Honestly, I thought it was another JRE episode where he was faithful to all the things that he's expressed about Kamala previously. And he kind of, he put his interest into it with giving his kind of same conversational tone. I think that, and honestly, I know this is going to enrage you, but I think that Joe Rogan did the best job he could have done while still staying true to some of the things he said previously and how he actually feels. Like, I think that in his mind, he was trying to, bring Donald Trump's weave back to the center and back to the point, not let him go too crazy. He did ask for him to back up his points where he made outrageous claims, such as, stealing the election and in 2020 and all that kind of stuff. He's not Rogan's not a journalist. This is kind of how he does it in a conversational way. And he does have a history when he gets people who are very large and very imposing and very famous. He gives them enough rope, you know what I mean? He gives them quite a lot of space to tell their side of it without coming down really hard on them. He doesn't get into an arm wrestling match with them usually. So, I actually think that the tone wasn't adoration that I felt. I know you took offense to kind of some of the opening, it wasn't balanced in your opinion, but I actually think that what I got from the first 30 minutes was quite a tense tone. It wasn't a super friendly. It was quite a terse. I felt a little bit of the tension, and then as kind of it got past the 1 hour mark, it became much more broy and laughy and a bit more back and forth, which is probably what people are wanting to see. Is does Trump pass the Joe Rogan sniff test? Can he come out of a 3-hour conversation with Rogan and where Rogan doesn't hate him or gets into an argument with him? Because that's what people are looking for. Does he pass the he's a good dude test, right? Is he normal? Is he kind of let's air it out? And Joe Rogan always has that view that I'll let him tell his side of the story, and I'll let her tell her side of the story, and the listener can I respect the listener because I'm the listener too, right? So he has very much that view, and I felt that. I did a bit of field testing as well to check some of my biases, and I do think that a lot of people who I spoke to that actually did listen to all or most of the episode had. I'll actually wrote down some of this feedback. They said, "Gee, it's actually interesting when I hear Trump talk for an extended time. He seems to know his stuff." That was a very interesting comment that I know will hurt you deep inside. I heard another one, and so that one was from a woman too, by the way. And then there was another one that said, he's a normal dude. How could this guy be the next Hitler? And another one just said, he's a crazy uncle, but he's actually quite interesting to listen to. And then I had a few that were just Joe Rogan, I can't believe that people listen to Joe Rogan. It was so boring. I could not pay attention for more than 20 minutes. So I got a few of those as well.
All right. Start from the beginning. So the comment I sent you by text was very much geared to literally the opening question was essentially, why is it that people misunderstand you and harshly criticize you when you're not that bad? That was essentially the opening, right? Which framed the whole rest of the conversation, which was basically that, hey, I'm not your enemy, Donald. I'm going to give you a soft ride so you can like let loose and like let your hair down and we'll have a good chat, right? That was probably like the reason he started off that way, right? He wanted to have that friendly, calming, set Donald Trump at ease, right? But for me, it was like that is essentially a signal from Joe Rogan to his audience that this guy is the most maligned figure in American political history, as opposed to this guy actually gets criticism because he deserves a criticism, right? He like it basically undermines anything negative said about Donald Trump that he actually deserves, right? He actually deserves the criticism he gets. I mean, the reason he is the most maligned president in history is because he's the most unfit for office president that America's ever had, right? So he's deserving of the criticism he gets. Now, I didn't pick up a lot of the tension that you sort of you maybe by like a Joe Rogan standard where they're just like smoking like weed and having like fun and lighthearted, exchange. Maybe it was a little bit more tense than a normal one, but it certainly wasn't tense. Like there was nothing critical or there wasn't any difficult questions or anything like that for Donald Trump. But like, I think
he held him.
He
brought him back to questions. Is what I mean.
Yeah, but I think bringing someone back to a question is just like an interview strategy to like make the episode not boring. It's not actually that you can't conflate that with that being a piece of like him holding him to account. That's different, right? There's a difference there, right? But just to why I think that Joe Rogan he goes down a few pegs in my eyes as a result, because
oh man, really?
Yeah, because you know what? Like I think there's a couple of points that I would say. Number one, I think if Joe Rogan had like Alex Jones on and Alex Jones started talking nonsense, like I think the consequences are not that significant. Like I think Joe Rogan can kind of make a bit of an art form of letting someone like an Alex Jones kind of go on and on and on, and like maybe some of the things he says on the on the show are like part of the entertainment. And if Donald Trump wasn't vying to be president, like maybe that would be okay, like as well with him as a guest. But the consequences are so huge here. The consequences are literally like, is this guy going to be president again? And I think if you're Joe Rogan, you've got to think about the consequences of your approach, and you've got to really think deep down inside, are you doing the right thing, in a different way as you would than if you had Alex Jones on or some other insert crazy guest here sort of thing. So I think that's the first point. Then I think the second point is that in some ways, Joe Rogan kind of legitimized like the actual factually wrong or misleading and deceptive things that he says. He actually legitimized them. He actually gave them credibility because it was Joe Rogan kind of almost saying it or feeding Donald Trump, like basically the really softball to hit out the ballpark, like basically feeding him, oh, so Donald, how the 2020 election was stolen, tell me more about that. Like a lot of the approach was, it was very uncritical. And I think that's where in this setting for this, like given the stakes are so high, I think Joe Rogan should have been more critical than he would have been in a regular episode. He didn't necessarily, like, he could have had a chat, like they could have had like a bro conversation about like MMA, like that would have been cool, like that would have been fine. It could have just been like, hey, we just want to know you as a guy, like we don't want to talk politics today, we just want to talk about MMA and like, women, like just tell us you're like, that would be like okay. but like literally like
Hillary, hot or not.
I just think just the way he legitimized it. And so the analogy I gave to you was and especially when Joe Rogan was like, oh, see, I called him out on this thing, and for me, the analogy is that you've got a used car. It's a late model vehicle. It looks in good nick. It's in a showroom. There's a used car salesman. In this setting, Joe Rogan is the used car salesman. And the car looks really good. It's actually a really good car. It's beautiful inside, well kept. Everything is in top condition. And then Joe Rogan, as the very honest, transparent salesman, goes around to the back of the vehicle with the customer and says, look, I want to be really honest with you. And so I'm just going to let you know there's a little tiny scratch here. Please have a look. In fact, I'll give you a magnifying glass if you want to have a closer look at this scratch, right? And that's essentially what Joe Rogan did to Donald Trump. Except the problem is this car, this late model used car in the showroom, doesn't have an engine. and and Donald Trump is that car without an engine. And Joe Rogan didn't tell the customer that this, like, didn't highlight for the customer that this car, this presidential candidate, actually, like, all of his flaws were completely unhighlighted in that 3-hour interview. Whereas I think Joe Rogan, what he should have done is he should have put on the table some of the bigger issues, the bigger, more contentious things that people are putting on the table when it comes to criticism about Donald Trump. And he didn't do that. And I think, again, like, I think you're totally right. Like, I think the most generous thing you can say about Joe Rogan is that this was like a normal Joe Rogan episode, right? And yeah, you can say, yeah, probably you're right. You know, I probably would agree with that. But this wasn't a regular Joe Rogan guest. This wasn't some retired, like, CIA guy who was excommunicated because he believed in, like, UFOs, right? This is the guy who, in literally less than a week, could be the president-elect. And that's important in that.
Yeah, but I think what you're wanting. So number one, the whole analogy, I do like that. It's quite good, but I just don't believe, you know, if you're running on the claim, the main kind of strategy is that a forfeit strategy, that Donald Trump is unfit for office, right? You've got nowhere to go, right? And no matter how much you want people to believe or to come with you on that journey that he should be disqualified before he even starts the race because of X, Y, Z, that's just a fool's errand at this stage, right? That's not going to happen. And, you know, half the country or more may be voting for him. You're fighting the reality of the situation that not at least half of America, or maybe a huge portion of America, does not believe that he is disqualified to run this race. So you have to focus on the race.
Yeah, but we're not talking about, like, what's the strategic decision calculation from the Harris campaign here. We're talking about what does all said and done, you know, Joe Rogan's a smart guy, right? And if he does have any intellectual honesty, maybe to sharpen what I said before, where, like, Joe Rogan, like, comes a peg or two a bit down for me, he's either intentionally acting in bad faith or he's not seeing something. Like, if you can't see why Donald Trump shouldn't be president, we're talking about in a meta sense here. I'm not saying that the line from the Harris campaign should be "you're stupid" if you
it's getting pretty close.
So you can say that, look, most people who are voting for Donald Trump, and this term "low information voters" gets used a lot, right? That a lot of the people who are, you know, have appealed towards Donald Trump are low information voters, right? And you could probably say that a lot of Joe Rogan's audience are also low information voters. The analytical point being that if Joe Rogan cannot see why Donald Trump is unfit for office, and therefore he is not going to, like, in his actions, you know, and he doesn't have to do it aggressively. Like, I wasn't after, like, him to become suddenly a journalist and ask hard hitting like that. That's not what, like, I wasn't after, like, Frost Nixon 2.0, right? What frustrated me was that Joe Rogan was legitimizing clear, like, falsehoods, like misleading information, and just kind of, like, adding more credence to it. And that was his action. Like, that was his contribution. Whereas he could have at least done, like, yeah, like, we're going to have a friendly chat, but I'm just not going to give you the space to kind of be crazy and say shit that, you know, that doesn't need to be said.
Look, I think I would like to labor on that point, though, right? Because it still comes back to what I said, where it's if Rogan cannot understand intellectually the disqualifying elements of Trump, then, like, that's his stupidity.
If you can't see why Donald Trump shouldn't be president, you're clearly, like, blind to something. Like, part of your vision is not working, right? And that doesn't mean you can't be smart in other ways. But there's some part of you that's not seeing something that's plain to see, and that might be the case with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, look, I just think that his style is pretty much to say, like, what you're reacting to there is almost the thesis of the Joe Rogan experience. He's like, we're all just average Joes. The best thing is to be curious, let people, you know, do more listening than talking, and try to make you up your own mind, right? And, like, yes, what comes with that, the downside that we've discussed, is actually, you know, unchecked propaganda and manipulation of thoughts and things like that. But hey, like, the antidote to that is to do your research, to listen to the other side and all this kind of stuff. And I'm largely okay with that, right? Like, I don't think that listening to Trump for 3 hours is like a brainwashing exercise.
I think the fact that you had some positive vibes from the actual podcast, for me, actually like makes my point for me, which is that you had people listen to that walking away thinking, oh, actually, this guy's like actually reasonable. And I think that's not how anyone who knows anything about Donald Trump and what he, like, his history, and like anyone who knows anything about his, whether it's in business, in politics, what he's proposing to do, like a good faith take away from Donald Trump and knowing him as a man shouldn't be that he's reasonable. And if this podcast gave people that impression, then like it instantly tells me that like this was a misleading, the effect, the net effect of this was misleading, because it gave a platform for him to work his magic.
Well, that's what do you call it, magic? Or
he's a charming guy. Like he is genuinely a good politician. Like, it's self-evident that he is, right? He's got this like cult of the personality around him, right? I think a lot of people would criticize him as being bad on policy, doesn't understand policy, doesn't understand government, doesn't really understand a lot of the actual administration side of government. You'd have an equal number of people who would say the same about him during his business career. They would say, well, he's actually not a good businessman. Like, he actually has a lot of flaws as a businessman. But you know what? One thing he is like exceptional at, and he has been exceptional at his whole career, is promoting Donald Trump. That is the thing that he's great at, and he is amazing at. And so when you let him come on to your little JRE show, I mean, it's not little, it's fucking huge, right? and you kind of give him like, you give him that audience, like he's gonna leave people like thinking, oh yeah, like I don't mind this, like this guy, he's okay. And like I've said before, like if he just had like some different views of the world, I'd probably love Trump. Like, I'd probably be a Trump supporter. I don't mind his like gregariousness. I don't mind that he's like a little bit brutish, right? That's not for me the issue with Trump. It's his aspirations and his danger to society.
He had this one line in there. Let me just to kind of indulge it for a second. He had this one line in there where I could see the cogs moving and the fuel craft, or the gift of the gab, if you will. He's going on about, like, he chooses as a midpoint when he has Rogan softened up a little bit, laughed at a few jokes, to kind of say, "Come on, Joe, you gotta endorse me. I know you, Joe. I know you better than anyone. Listen to you stuff. You're not a Kamala guy. And you can see he's thinking, he's like, I can't say you're a Trump guy, Kamala. You're a Khabib guy. And he picks Khabib to kind of be this moniker for the UFC side of the audience, the idea that he respects achievement and meritocracy and masculinity and stuff. And like, man, that's good thinking on your feet, to be able to like not, of course he wanted to say like, you're not a Kamala guy, you're a Trump guy. But he like switches it out in the last minute. He has this like micro pause and picks Khabib's name, which is obviously a champion UFC wrestler for those who aren't in the know. And the interview was spotted with all sorts of little things like that. And I'll kind of respect that game when I see it, right? And I agree with you, but a lot of it is just salesmanship. But that is also a skill that is important, right? And I do believe that the audience can smell bullshit as well if it's there. So, I've got a little bit more faith in the kind of Rogan methodology of just giving them enough rope, and the audience, like, the truth will come out, right? Like, and you'll be able to tell. Like, just like you listen to him talk about his tariffs, and you were just, your skin was crawling in that section.
Wasn't he quoting McKinley? It's like, what the fuck? Yeah, but we're talking about the people who, like, we're engaged, right? Like, so we're talking about the unengaged here, and look, as I said, like, maybe like, I don't want to hold like Joe Rogan to some like unreasonably high expectation, like of what he should have done in that interview. So like, I don't want to be unreasonable about it, but like, I just think if we were delivered most of what we heard, then I would have been like, okay, well, of course it was only ever going to be that. It was actually just the moments where like Joe Rogan literally set up. They were just softballs, like they were underarm, like go and hit this one, like hit this for 6, like here you go, I'm giving you the softest ball here. And I just think that if Joe Rogan was a consequentialist and he considered, look, I want this guy like who's vying to be president to be like, I'm not going to be like hard or brutal on him, but I'm not going to give him like.
He'd do the same for Kamala.
Maybe we'll never know, but I can't imagine him coming on, as in Kamala Harris coming on, and his first question to Kamala being something like, look, everyone like talks about like this, your word salad, but you're actually really eloquent. Like you're actually a really good speaker. Like
I will bet you $100 that if that podcast episode goes ahead, he will say something almost exactly to that tune and bring up something that he's repeated on previous episodes quite a few times, that when you did that, you did that first rally, it was amazing. The reason why people who don't listen to podcasts or don't listen to long form anything to do with Trump thought that he came across much better than they thought is a testament to how crazy the media cycle is. And a really good example on that is the whole Trump is a Nazi, he's Hitler, he's a fascist kind of thing. And that's the problem with going like that. Because when you come onto a podcast like this, you neutralize most of that by just the general steadiness of a conversation. The two things, that's why that whole strategy is a losing strategy, right? Because it just looks like you're trying to manipulate people when he's clearly not like that when you listen to him, right? And I think that I want to call that out because that's a theme that goes through into other things in the last week.
When someone says like Trump's like kind of like got Hitler vibes or fascist vibes, right? Like this isn't, that'd be a great campaign ad if we like dress him up as Hitler and like then the MAGA audience will really stop voting for him, like they'll stop supporting him. But the reason people are bringing up the Hitler analogy and the fascist analogy is that there are a lot of very real and legit parallels between, Hitler's rise to power and what we're seeing now with Trump. Now there are some echoes here, right? And fascism, like Trump meets like fairly neatly the objective definition of a fascist. And can I just add that that's actually not necessarily what I'm saying. That's actually what his former chief of staff said about him. So this is like the people who know him the best, right? Have that view of him. And the trouble with like the Hitler/Nazi thing is that most people, when you say he's like Hitler, the first thing they think of is that he's genocidal. I don't think Trump is genocidal. So the analogy for me, like Hitler as a very charismatic figure that had a cult of the personality develop around him, that managed to seize a movement around him, that managed to take over an existing political movement, that had grassroots support by appealing to people who were disillusioned, who had someone to speak to issues that no one else was speaking to them on, who then used means to acquire power that broke existing norms and rules and managed to get into power in a way that it was very questionable. Now, 2020, I mean, Donald Trump would be president right now if he had his way, even though he didn't win the election. And I think one of the big questions on everyone's minds now is what happens if he loses this election? What are we going to see in the next week or two if he doesn't win the election? And the fact that we're even having that conversation, the fact that you have major newspapers so shit scared because their billionaire owners are afraid of what he might do to them when he comes into power, that they're not going to endorse a candidate as they always have by convention, by tradition. The fact that like this is not like business as usual, and so I think that's where the Hitler/fascist kind of line. It's actually like this is what people are thinking about now. But then on the same token, if you say don't support Trump, he's a fascist, that's a terrible line because that's not going to convince anyone. But analytically, he's kind of a fascist. You know what I mean?
All right, I gave you the space to draw on it, but I think it crossed over into you providing justification for why it would be appropriate to draw out parallels and call him a fascist or whatever. Look, I think that this is just the motivation behind just conveniently calling out these parallels or this not coming from like some kind of strategy from the Harris campaign or whatever. Like Come on, you got to call it for what it is. They're doing it to create strong language to distort public perception, making it harder to separate, the fray from what is a theoretical definition of fascism to all the other things and all the other consequences of it using Hitler language. And man, the calls are coming from inside the house. Like Tim Walz has literally been out there attacking, like even the Madison Square Garden rally, pointing out this whole thing about how it's drawing parallels to the Nazi rally, all those years ago, and all these other things like that. Like this has got to stop. Like,
but the worst thing you can say about that is it's bad politics. But do you disagree? Do you disagree with the analogy?
I totally disagree.
Okay, talk me through.
You could swap that long kind of explanation you gave. You could substitute like 95% of that behavior for just the term of being a populist.
No, you've got authoritarian tendencies, militarized symbolic spectacle, cult of personality, anti-democratic rhetoric, encouraging violence and civil unrest.
Where's this militarized demonstrations?
You will use the military against the enemy within. The fact that he asked the military to shoot the protesters and then they said, sorry, sir, we can't do that. Like this was when he was president, just after the, when he went and did that Bible thing, he put his, did that walk to the church outside the White House. Like he literally asked the military, why can't you shoot the protesters in the knees? Like in the
man, this is a losing strategy. It is totally inappropriate for the VP nominee to say a fucking a Republican rally just because in Madison Square Garden there was something similar in the Nazis in the 30s, that this should be some kind of correlation to Trump being a Nazi, right?
Not that they had a rally or a whatever it is rally the right way. Not that they had an event at Madison Square Garden, but that's not what they're actually drawing the analogy on. They're drawing the analogy on the fact that you've got a guy who basically, in every other respect, doesn't respect American democracy. And just to be clear, the analogy, it's got nothing to do with Madison Square Garden and that they had an event. It's got to do with Trump and the way he's conducted himself. Dude,
the video pack reels that I've seen have a video of the packed out Madison Square Garden for the Republican rally.
But
and then
that's
literally
not why they're saying it. I don't know if George Bush ever had a rally at Madison Square Garden, but if George Bush had an event at Madison Square Garden of that nature, they would not have said it. The reason they're saying it is because of Trump and the things that he's doing. Like he's laying the ground for him to debate that he lost the election should he lose it next week. The fact that he tried to do it in 2020, the fact that he's got a lot of things that he has done already that are contrary to American democracy and that threatened American democracy. That's what they're challenging. No one ever would have said that George Bush was a threat to American democracy. A lot of people didn't like George Bush, but they would never have thought that he was a threat to American democracy, but they do for Trump, and that's why he's subject to this. And it's appropriate that he's held to that standard. That's a different question to, is it smart politics to call people fascists if they support Trump? Because that's bad politics.
It's not appropriate to compare Trump to a Nazi.
It is. Okay. If you when you look at the comparison and embodied in the term comparing him to Nazi, you're saying, well, yeah, but the Nazis were also genocidal, and you're connecting that part of the Nazis and everything they did subsequent to coming to power, then yes. But if you're talking about the way that the Nazi regime came to power, and you're talking about
the
parallels
talked about
of the past,
outcomes matters, man, and you're trying to tell me that you should be able to academically separate calling someone a Nazi from the acts that the Nazis perpetrated.
Like, there's a lot of frustrated people out there, including myself, probably, who care about these things, right? Because they're actually really important. And the fact that we're even talking about that Trump's a viable candidate right now, to people like me, and obviously not you, and that's where I think we're struggling here, right? It just should be outrageous that, like, people don't see these things as important. And so there's a lot of frustration, right? And people are grappling for, what are the analogies? What's the way we can communicate the threat that he poses? Now, if you ask me, is the threat the same? Now, I think if anyone was to say that Donald Trump is dangerous in the same way as the Nazis were dangerous, I would say no. But I think when you're talking about the fascist element of National Socialism in Germany in the 1930s, then the analogy sticks, and it's a fair analogy. And you can look through the history of how the Nazis came to power. And maybe the analogy here is that when you have unchecked power, when you have like the all-powerful dictator, that's dangerous. And that allows that person to do what they want to do, in the same way as Hitler was able to do what he wanted to do, and that was bad.
Hitler didn't govern for 4 years and then give the power back and then try again.
Well, neither did Donald Trump. He didn't want to.
Of course, he didn't want to.
It was just lucky that he didn't have enough tools to do that.
No one wants to.
Donald Trump did not hand back power. Can we agree with that?
Who's been governing for the last 3.5 years?
Okay, Donald Trump legit, knowingly tried to remain in power even though he knew that he lost the election. So this guy did not give away power. He just didn't have a choice. From
2017 through to 2020, there are verbatim claims on the record from Hillary Clinton still claiming that Trump was an illegitimate president and that he didn't win.
Hillary Clinton does not contest that Donald Trump, in the course of the election, won the necessary votes to be president. Hillary Clinton might have views on the things that happened surrounding the election, but she doesn't question she might have criticism about the actual outcome of the election and the way it was conducted and other things that happened throughout the election. And she might rhetorically make a claim. I don't know what lines you're talking about, but I could imagine she would make a claim about
due to Russian interference.
But
an illegitimate president.
Donald Trump, okay, Roger, Donald Trump legitimately expected Mike Pence to
if you're
commit basically election fraud.
If you're going to try to back me into a corner where I'm defending Trump's actions, that's not going to happen here.
Why are you defending Trump? Like, why are you defending the steal? Like, why
they have a go? Like these candidates have a go, and no.
No one has ever done in the history of American politics what Trump has done.
Like I said, do a search. So many lost candidates have caused illegitimate things.
If you think Trump was just doing standard politics stuff, you're completely wrong. And well, what are you saying then? You're saying that it's the same as what Hillary Clinton did because she made some comments about the 2016 election.
There's nothing. I'm saying that there's nothing new in people being sore losers.
There is absolutely new.
What's new for Trump?
Yeah, but he was more than a sore loser. He actually did. Like, people associated with his regime have been in jail relating to the conspiracy. In fact, like the only person who's not in jail who should be in jail is Donald Trump.
Well, that might change, and that might be why he's running so hard. But all I'm saying is that.
But come on, okay? Can you like level head? I know you're probably playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, but like it shouldn't be that we have to have a conversation about this. It should be that you concede and you grant me that, like, because we don't want to propagate disinformation here, Roger. You should be able to
exactly what disinformation
that Trump is the games that he's been playing is just part of normal politics, right? That there is something fundamentally wrong with not only what he did in 2020, but that what he looks likely to be doing now, basically laying the groundwork for the same rhetoric to be run should he not win next week, right? So
they're all as crooked as each other, mate.
That is precisely the point. Yes, they're all crooked, but you've got Donald Trump who's off the charts crooked, and that's the problem.
I agree with that.
They're not all as crooked as each other.
The problem with Donald Trump, in my opinion, is that in the crooked, corrupt business of politics, he refuses to play by the standards of the crooked, corrupt mob that they have somehow enforced over time as a honor amongst thieves situation. And when they come in, they cry poor, but really, they're all as crooked as each other.
There's a lot of things that I see as very dangerous and that I see as very important. And I think you can't see them, because if you did see them, you would have the same view as me.
So you're framing as I can't see it because there's some inability. I just don't agree with it.
But then you can't see it because if you could see it,
it makes you feel better that you think you've got the right answer.
Okay, so you don't agree with it. Talk me through why you don't agree with it. Because
you're the one that's saying that he's the danger. You have to kind of. Do you really believe this is going to be the last election or anything like that. All this stuff that they're saying, all this rhetoric that they're saying, this all bullshit. Do you really believe that for a second? Because then I think you're missing something.
The issue is that with Kamala Harris as president, there's like 100% chance that you'll have a fairly shit and mediocre president, okay, with Kamala Harris. And that sounds terrible. That sounds like, all right, well, how do I vote for Trump? Where do I sign up? Problem is with Donald Trump, it's like a 95% chance you'll have a really shit president. But there's also a 5% chance that you'll have a catastrophic outcome, either relating to a decision he makes as president because he's just completely, like, he doesn't follow conventions, he doesn't take advice, he doesn't, like, he's unpredictable. He's getting old too, so that's got to be a factor. He is not someone who has a legacy of, you know, kind of making really well-considered decisions, right? But the way he conducts himself, and it's the Roy Cohn sort of school of politics as well, is that you break down the system. This is the Chesterton fence, right? He's willing to jump over that fence in the middle of the forest without knowing what's on the other side because he's too like narcissistic to realize that there are real consequences. There could be consequences on that other side of the fence that he doesn't know about. And that's something that I give that a 5% chance. I give that, and it's, of course, it's probably like the distribution is probably something like 5% chance of something really catastrophic. And then there's probably another 15% on top of that chance of like something maybe not catastrophic, but like still really quite bad. And then there's like 80% chance it's just going to be like it was last time around, right? But you have to be thinking about those probabilities. You have to be thinking about, like, because the consequences are so significant. Now, if you're comparing Kamala Harris to Donald Trump and you're saying, well, what's the worst that Kamala Harris is going to do? Like, she's like, the worst she's going to do, she's going to do some silly, you know, like some kind of economic, like, I don't know, bring in some terrible economic policy that, you know, might harm GDP growth a bit or something like that. And that's probably bad. Yes, agree. But she's not going to like ruin American democracy. She's going to be, if she wins, it's going to be, all right, we've sailed through this unstable era. If Trump wins, you can't say that. It's going to be very uncertain, and he's going to make a bunch of bad calls about like America's role in global politics, geopolitics. Like, God knows what's going to happen in Ukraine. What's going to happen? Like what America's just going to like retreat.
Let me.
I mean, what is even Trump's vision? Like,
let me respond.
Like,
let me respond, because I think
it matters.
I think that well, number one, there's an assumption that you're saying that the Kamala Harris presidency would be quite benign, and I don't believe that's the case. Look at the damage that's caused by the unchecked, like, you know, tens of millions of immigration into, like, that has had a real and devastating effect on some places in the United States already. And as much as she wants to bend the truth about that happened under her watch and Biden's watch. Now, I've heard this kind of, I actually have much more faith in the vehicles of democracy in the US. I think that the system will chew them and spit them out in due course. And I actually don't think that the presidency has as much power as you're giving him credit for. I know you think that Trump's a special case, but I really just don't think he is. I think that it's equally... I just do not give credence to the fact that this is like a blow-up 5% doomsday scenario or whatever it is, right? Catastrophic doomsday scenario.
But it's a distribution. You might be right. But the issue isn't whether your expectation is that that's the case. The fact is there's a chance that it's the case, right?
I think it's much more in the middle.
And that's what you've got to be worrying about.
The main thing will be the degradation of niceties of etiquette, maybe the Overton window argument that actually what's acceptable to say, what's acceptable to do is fundamentally changed over course, and that needs to be. But that's exactly how the system is set up. It will give rise to a candidate. Do you know what? There's people in Nazi
Germany who said the same thing before Hitler. No, seriously. Roger, that is why the analogy sticks, because...
And that's why I asked you, do you legitimately think that this is the last election?
There were people in Europe, there were like people in the UK watching what was happening in Germany at the time who said exactly what you said, who said, oh, no, it's just, this is, you know, yes, this guy will come and go, you know, and that's, and you know what, you might be right. Okay. In fact, if you ask me what is the most likely outcome, it's what you've actually laid out, right? The most likely outcome is if he wins, he'll have 4 years. He won't be eligible to run again. He'll hand over to some successor if he has, I think there's a ceiling of Trump support, so the Democrats might get back in. I don't think it will be like, this dynasty of leaders, I don't think that's on the cards. But that's my central case, right? But Roger, if you can't see that there's a probability that that's not actually going to happen,
you're
then
not behaving like
you're missing a key part of this equation.
Trump is not a big figure. He will not be a big historical figure. He's transactional. He's a transactional kind of business negotiation guy or whatever it is, right? Like he's a brand guy. It causes, like, I don't lose sleep over that danger. He's not that person. He doesn't want, like you said, doesn't have grand ideas of changing the world in these ways, right? Like it's literally, he's thinking about Trump brand. He's an old man. He's probably going to sit on a golf course. You've got a young up and coming kind of party coming through. Like I don't believe that the conviction and how you're behaving is based on a 5% probability. Is based on your aversion to his character, right? And that's justified.
It's not, though. No, that's completely unfair.
But really, you behave this way because you think that there is a legitimate 5% chance that there's going to be like a catastrophic event.
Okay, when you have people who come in and destroy the institutions of government, that's incredibly damaging, and that can have long-lasting effects in a democracy. And the reason why people bring up like the Nazis example is because that's what happened in Germany. Okay, that's actually what happened in Germany. Now, I agree it's not like a good analogy because there's just too much other loaded stuff around it. But that's literally how the Nazis came to power. They eroded the institutions of government and they took them over, and they infected it like a disease, right? Like a virus, and that damages in a lasting way. And so I respect those institutions. And
there's real changes that need in those systems too, Andy. Like you're thinking that,
but Donald Trump is not the man to improve those systems.
Often not
like
the person, right? Like, but
he is like going into government and he's got the like machine gun and he's shooting everything up, right? It's not like, we're not talking about some like careful like design thinking approach to like how can we improve government.
The person that gets you up off the seat is not always the person who fixes it. There are 5 times as many like lobbyists than there are politicians. Like in the States, there's a lot of people who are unhappy with the status quo, and so they may not be so interested in protecting the status quo in the same way that you're talking about. Like they want some of that change, right?
Even if you think that the Trump presidency is most likely going to be the greatest American presidency we've ever seen before, there's still like, now whether I've given it 5% just to pluck a figure out of nowhere, right? But like, if you can't see that there's like some non-negligible chance of ruin with Donald Trump, and that like, it's like with any kind of expected value calculation, right? If you've got something that's like high impact, you've got to like, even if it's a low probability of occurring, you've got to weight it, like you've got to value it. Like you can't just ignore it. And I would say that the median sort of value of what a outcome under Trump and Harris might look like. I mean, I could grant you that they're probably just as bad as each other in their own unique ways, right? Probably Trump worse, but the difference is Kamala Harris doesn't have that fight, whether it's 5%, 1%, 3%, whatever. Kamala Harris doesn't have that probability of ruin. And I think that's the core difference between us. And I don't think that's actually the case. You must be able to see that there's some chance of ruin with Donald Trump. But, so you might argue, well, you said it's 5%. I actually think it's like 0.0005%. Like, you can argue about the magnitude, right? But it matters that there's a chance of ruin with Donald Trump. And that has to be factored in. And I think if someone can't see that, then they're naive.
You've changed the goalpost pretty significantly. Like, if your argument is that if there's any percentage point, no matter how small,
well, orders of magnitude more than there would be with Kamala Harris.
Yeah,
like 100 times the chance of ruin with Donald Trump than there would be with Kamala Harris, and not insignificant.
So yeah, I mean, look, there's no, how many times do you want to roll the dice? I don't know. Like,
well, obviously we're talking about like a conceptual concept here, right? So we're not even talking about what we mean by ruin and all that sort of stuff, and we don't need to. But the thing is, like, I think in all of our conversations today, right, I think we've done a lot of conversation about what the like what the highest probability outcome of a Trump versus a Kamala Harris presidency might look like, right? And on that front, I probably prefer a Kamala Harris presidency, but it's not that I necessarily think the most likely outcome under a Trump presidency is necessarily all that bad. But there's a lot of stuff that Trump's been doing to suggest that this could be like catastrophic.
Come on, man. Kamala's going to put the company tax rate up to 28%. He's going to drop it down even further than it is from 21.
Well, he's going to put on tariffs. So
he's going to have the threat of tariffs because he likes the idea of leverage.
He's not going to have the threat of tariffs. He's going to have tariffs.
Not across the board.
Yeah, that's his plan.
Well, I mean, Kamala Harris is also saying that she's going to overturn Roe v. Wade and she's going to put a capital gains tax on when you die. Like, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like,
it's a probability that some very bad people and some very misguided people and some very people who are not going to make the right calls are like going to be in charge, right? And that's
but the system. Like, the presidency doesn't have that power.
Yeah, but you've got the president who's actively working to subvert the system. Like, that's the problem.
There was a really good analogy that came about in the 2016 race. And I've heard it crop up in a few different guises over the last few months. And I really like it, right? They talk about this idea of like the American democracy being a strainer, and the candidate and the presidency and their cabinet and everything, you know, pours stuff into the strainer, and what gets out is the outcomes of their presidency, right? And so this is the idea that actually, no matter what happens, the strainer holds. And if there's an argument that like Trump is fundamentally changing the structure of the strainer, then, you know, like, I'm open for that. Like, I think that's a very serious discussion to be had.
Yeah, well, that is the discussion.
But he's been through the strainer once, and what came out wasn't that.
Well, he came very close to it. It could have gone. We could have been in a very different history. Like, I don't think you. I mean, we're talking about a very narrow case here in the 2020 election and what he did. And
well, I think you need to be careful too around like what he did versus what his like affiliates did as well.
Come on, man! Like Donald Trump set up the system, and maybe this is the flaw, right? He set up a system where he wanted basically everyone to come and give him the answers to, okay, I've got this problem and I want people who are going to give me solutions to my problem. My problem is that I didn't win the election, so you're going to come and solve this problem for me, right? Got rid of all the people who said, sorry, Mr. President, you didn't win the election. And then you're left with the hangers-on who are saying God knows what conspiracy theories to get him elected. Oh, yeah, I like that. That's a good one, you know. My hands are clean. It's just this guy, you know. This guy set up like the environment for his surrogates and people to do this. So he absolutely knew what he was doing, and in fact, it was this is not
I agree partially. I think at heart he is an opportunist.
But you realize
But
you realize the election steal thing has something he used during the primaries, right? This wasn't a new thing. This was a tactic he's used before. So. And even the way they discussed it before the election, they were talking about. Steve Bannon was talking about. Okay, so what's going to happen? We're going to have the blue wave because. We're going to have the red wave because, red mirage. You know, so what we got to do is we've got to declare we've won.
Yeah, get the voting to start.
Before, like they were even like mapping it out beforehand. Like so, and you know, so I just think now.
So, okay, just to tie back to Rogan, though, because he had that segment, maybe this is one of the things you're talking about. He said that no one believes that there's no percentage points of voter fraud. So are you saying it's like comments like that are giving credence to Trump's message?
I don't actually remember that particular line, but I think when you put, okay, give me, like, my recollection of that part of the Joe Rogan exchange was something to the effect of, tell the audience why you actually won the 2020 election, and said, look, in your own words, I'm going to give you the opportunity to. No one's let you explain it before.
I've got papers.
Yeah, so he rolls out this vague line about papers. I've got the court said this or whatever. I don't even know what he said. I can't remember now. But it's like this. It basically gives a platform for Trump to sound kind of credible. Like most people who know anything about what happened would know that it's all bullshit. But like kind of like for anyone who's not sure, like, oh, okay, yeah, he said that, and Joe Rogan didn't really say anything follow up, so maybe it's like
the Hunter Biden thing.
Maybe.
I think was one of the biggest things.
I just think this is that part. Maybe it was an example. Like I would count that as an example, but anyway. But like I just think and we've talked about like Donald Trump being like the 5% chance of a catastrophic outcome. There's like lots of ways that can be a catastrophic outcome. I mean, even if we get through 4 years of Donald Trump and there's no threat to American democracy or American institutions or government.
Do you think JD is?
Well, less so than Trump, that's for sure. But I think JD on his own is preferable to JD as VP to Trump. The other probability of a catastrophic outcome is like bad policy decisions that are made by Trump for the next 4 years.
He can sign executive orders, but he's got to get through things that through Congress, right? Like I mean,
presidents have like they control the like nuclear weapons.
Oh yeah, I mean,
for example,
the football.
Like there's lots of things.
That probably is the most kind of executive, most power that they wield. But these things they can't get them through. Like the system protects them.
But there's lots of and you have to remember Trump isn't just Trump as president. Trump's got control of the Republican movement, right? So, and everyone's scared of him, and they're all worried. Like there's virtually he's got unchecked power because no one in the Republican Party can stand up to him.
They have.
And people who know that, and you know what, they endorsed Kamala Harris shortly thereafter because they get exercise from their party, right? So he has unchecked power in the party, and so it's not just the case that he's got to convince. Like it's very risky, and like tariffs is one of the funniest things on the Rogan Experience was hearing him talk about tariffs.
You would love that.
it was just like, I mean, this is a guy who was talking about economic policy from basically
he went
the
to
1800s. Like this is
it's the threat of tariffs there.
This is the word. No, but his policy is to bring in tariffs.
They left a lot of those tariffs in, man. Biden's government.
No, across the board.
No, I know,
tariff.
but that's the threat on some of this stuff, right?
No, but that's his policy to have tariffs. Like, what are we saying, that he's not going to do it when he gets in office?
I don't think he's going to put across the board tariffs on. No.
Well, that's his policy. To give Trump credit in an underhanded way, the one thing he has been consistent about in his whole career is this view that there's some yellow peril somewhere in Asia. At first it was Japan, then it was China taking advantage of Americans through trade policy. And he would look at the trade deficit because he doesn't understand economics. He would use that as a proxy for, well, a deficit. Deficits must be bad, right? And he's consistently had the view that there's something pernicious in the approach of these emerging Asian countries that, at first it was Japan, then it was China. That he's had that view for a very long time. It's even referenced in Art of the Deal. If you read Art of the Deal, he talks about it in the context of Japanese imports. So he has been consistent on that point. And in some ways that makes it more dangerous because it's like he believes that, right? A lot of the stuff that Trump says, you can say, well, he actually doesn't believe that. He's just jumping on it as a populist, right? But this stuff he actually does believe.
Yeah, but Trump
and so that's why I don't have any fear that he's actually going to do it.
Trump will do what he did last time because that's what he wanted to do, But I want to ask you, like, we started this discussion, this arc on the US election on you thinking the betting odds were the most reliable or interestingly reliable indicator of the state of the race. Now, obviously, it's very much in favor of Trump, at 157 for Trump and 240 for Harris. What are your thoughts on what's going on there?
Just to correct the record, I don't think I've ever said I think they're the best predictor. I think I've used them as a predictor, and certainly I've quoted betting odds throughout the race to get a sense of how they're comparing. But I've been skeptical of betting odds for some time. Thankfully, I haven't been burned, like, kind of in reality, but I've seen situations where I've looked at the betting odds for various elections and I've seen examples of where they've just got it actually quite wildly wrong. To answer your point, look, if I was like if I was investing, like if I genuinely wanted to win money, I would definitely put money on Kamala Harris because she's undervalued in the odds, because I think there's a lot of, I would say Trump is the clear favorite in the betting odds. I don't know what they are now, but they're probably $1.45 or $1.50.
157, like I just checked.
157. So he's actually come out a little bit because I saw him at $1.45 the other day. But I think what's happening is there's a lot of strategic money going on Trump to make the betting odds look a certain way. You've got a lot of billionaires and people who are manipulating the markets. But then I think you've got also a lot of like the crypto kind of coin that's sort of following into it. And by crypto coin, I mean, kind of the people who maybe have money and they want to put it somewhere, but they don't do their homework. And I think if you look at, the modeling and you look at some of the simulations of different various outcomes, I mean, you look at the polls and all those sorts of things, like I think it's probably reasonable to say that Trump's marginally ahead, but I don't think it's true to say that he's like as far ahead as what the betting odds suggest.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
I think, but fuck, what do I know? Just to be honest.
Sam Bankman-Fried famously devised a scheme to offer Trump $5 billion to pull out of the 2016 election.
It was a good deal.
like many of SBF's wheelings and dealings, underappreciated and misunderstood. But this time around, what do you think would be a sensible number? Literally, I'm being serious.
Just on Sam Bankman-Fried, because we did an episode on him. Like I think, like if he pulled that off, it all would have been worth it. Like
it would.
Like everything, not just the $5 billion.
In retrospect,
but the scammy thing, the scammy practice, the FTX.
You definitely should get immunity for that.
Like it all would have been worth it. But
talk about breaking the strainer. if some autistic dude can get enough capital to literally pull out a candidate, doesn't that affect the strainer? Because a lot of people look back and say, hell, that seems like good value right about now.
I think what's the right value now? Look, I don't think it's the future of human civilization is priceless, so I don't think that has an answer, does it?
Well, maybe we can bring it home, like collectively say our life-saving, the Andy and Roger life-saving fund, and we had a guarantee that our money would like take him out of the race. What would we do?
Do you know a lot of the stuff we've talked today like sounds very hyperbolic, we've talked about Nazis and all that sort of stuff, but like, I think we got to like play the long game here a little bit, right? Because like we would say, 4 years, it's 4 years, what's the worst that can happen, all that sort of stuff. But like, like the world is ever changing, right? Like we live here in Australia and we live very stable, comfortable lives by comparison to most people in the world, right? And we should be very hyper-conservative, right? In the sense that I don't mean conservative in some kind of left-right sort of progressive conservative dimension. I mean conservative in the sense that like our best interests are served by the status quo. For better or worse, you might say, oh, that's, imperialist, view of the world. Of course you'd say that. But seriously, at the end of the day, colonizer. Stability and the status quo, including America being our security partner, including America as a countervailing force to other countries like China, and now we've got Russia doing all sorts of things. Like it does matter who the president of the United States is, and we might say, like, and I think maybe I don't mean
I'm not laughing at your thing. I'm just like thinking about a line in the Rogan episode where he was talking about why Ukraine wouldn't be at war if he was in power. And he was recalling this thing, and literally this is like almost verbatim. It's like, and then I said to Putin, don't do it, because if you do it, I'm going to bomb the shit out of you. And he said, no, you won't do that. And he said, well, I might.
I mean, I just think with this stuff, there's a certain kind of, I think this is the Chesterton fence, right? And I'm not willing to cross it. And perhaps if you're, if you're a downtrodden American whose economic opportunities have dried up, maybe you do want to cross the Chesterton fence. Maybe you want to give Trump a go, because it'll just disrupt everything. And, and to be honest, that's a lot of Trump's support. But I think if you're
I want to flip over the monopoly board,
like exactly. But where we are right here, right now, and we're thinking maybe the longer term, we're thinking a longer term game, because we've got it pretty sweet as it is, right? Like Kamala Harris is the continuity candidate, right? She's the one she is the equivalent of not jumping, and just the Chesterton fence is, if for anyone who's not heard of it, it's this idea of like, someone's in a forest and they see this random gate or fence, right? And you can cross it, but like it begs the question, why is the fence there to begin with? And you don't know what's on the other side, like, because there could be some bad things on the other side, but you can't know. It's just a fence in the middle of nowhere. So your choices are honor the fence and just don't cross it, and just you'll never know what's on the other side. But like, you know that you're going to be safe, right, on your side of the fence. Or you can cross it and you can find out what's on the other side. But equally, you might get eaten alive by a tiger. So there's just so many different permutations of what things could be like with Donald Trump, right? And that's the 5% that I was arguing about before. And I think for us, like we should be, and so back to Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Like it's like I put like, for me, the uncertainty is so huge. Like, I don't know, like you can put like literally, like it could literally be the case that there's a situation that comes up where Donald Trump is the difference between like ruin of human civilization versus like if Kamala Harris was in that office, we would have prices averted, right?
The really bad things in this world come from ideologues, not inconfident bravado. Like, I actually just don't, like, I think the truly horrible things come from people with visions, with big ideas and things like that. And I just don't think that he's one of those people.
But Roger, do you know the people who have visions? It's people like Xi Jinping, Putin, and those people. He has
an incredible relationship with all of those men. He plays like a league basketball game with them every Saturday.
They're the ideologues.
Yeah.
And you're going to take, actually, you know what? Like, I'm going to go a step further. We actually need an ideologue in the White House. Needs someone who believes in liberal democratic order. They believe in freedom. They do believe in democracy. They believe in like doing the right thing. We actually do need that ideology. And that's the problem with Trump in a lot of ways, is he doesn't possess that ideology. His ideology is whatever is in Donald Trump's best interest. And that's the problem. Like, because America, I agree. Especially for a country like Australia, like we want someone out there, like we want America to play that role as like the leader of like, hey, freedom, yeah, fuck yeah. Like, and if you're an American listener, I hate to put in these terms, but your country looks so shit right now, honestly. Like we look to your country as, especially like in Australia, like in a lot of ways, like a lot of it's corny, a lot of it's like contrived, and like we laugh at you sometimes. But like, make no mistakes, like America, like there's something special there, and I think it's actually quite sad that Donald Trump is that to me is sad.
It is. Look, it is. And but in the same way that whenever I have a go at Harris about her capability or how she presents, you bring it back to the, this is what the deck has dealt, right? Like, I mean,
just think of this for a minute, right? In our lifetime, right? Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Harris, Trump. Like, what's happened? You know what I mean?
I'm with you. Like, I haven't heard a satisfying answer for that. I haven't. All I know is that if Kamala is really of Indian heritage, then why the fuck hasn't she wished everyone happy Diwali?
Can I just ask you one question to finish off with? I want to give you a bit of a platform to take a swing at me. I want to know, like, and be honest with me, because this is part of the exercise. Be as brutal and blunt, like, in fact, like, make it a bit spicy just for extra fun, right? What do you think? Like, what annoys you most about me and my view on these issues?
I think I know what you want, but the real answer is that this particular issue is making you lose your Andiness. It's making you lose
my Andiness.
Your ability to what you pride yourself, which is dispassionately, like, discussing the issue without attacking the messenger, without kind of hanging on every word to look for the confirmation, or skipping to an outcome that you think is just, right? So I think it's those things, and in the process, if this is what you're looking for, it comes across as, condescending, self-righteous, that you think you know the answer. I don't think you should be, and especially we should be, taking it as like high stakes as it has to be, right? Like, I don't think we should be getting as worked up about this thing, and that's why that's why I'm not returning fire on these things. Like, I don't think that, like, I think when it's one of those situations where, like, the whole town's sinking and you're grabbing a bucket, and I think we should both be in our bathers, like, just like splashing around.
That's fair enough. Like, I think there's probably two ways these kind of conversations can go. And like, I think a good example is and you got me onto was I can't remember what's that podcast.
The Rest is Politics.
The rest is politics.
I'm
up to have that kind of a conversation, like the way they do it, which is very, like, for anyone who doesn't listen to it, which I imagine is most people, like they call out both sides. They say, all right, yeah, that was a good move, that was a bad move. They, like, they're more analytical than I think. Well, certainly what I think I've been. But they're not arguing with each other. Like, and I think that I was thinking about this. I was thinking I'd love to have a conversation like that, but the difference is that they are on the same page. Like, there's no.
I am on the same page as you, Andy. Like, I actually am on the same page about a lot of things.
But there's no, like, they both. I think there's no debate about Trump, right? Like, they both, and they probably have quite different perspectives because, of course, one of them worked for him and got burned by him, and then has, like, probably quite personal reasons, for having his view about Trump. The other is more just like a straight-laced BBC kind of commentator kind of thing. But, like, the whole concept of that show isn't to debate whether Donald Trump is or isn't, whatever, right? But I think where we've maybe gone wrong, or at least where you see that, Andy, you don't like, is that I
don't not like it. Like, actually, I think that this is part of the problem that I'm not trolling you. I'm not trying to trigger you or troll you, but I am trying to, like, flesh it out. And I think that you're taking it more seriously. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I just, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that, as an example, if you said to me, all right, let's talk about the Nazi thing, right? Okay, so it doesn't need to be said that there are, like, parallels between how National Socialism came to power and how, like, some of the things that have happened, or that, like, some of the tendencies or whatever. Like, we don't need to have that conversation because we're on the same page about that. Then you can move on to the piece about, okay, but is this good politics, right? Or is this, like, the kind of thing you want to be saying in a campaign? Or But I think we get stuck at, are they actually similar in the first place, right? Whereas I think if Caddy Kay and Scaramucci were talking about that, I think they wouldn't get stuck on the question of, is that a viable comparison to make? Because I think they'd both agree that, well, it might be an awkward one, but there's definitely echoes in between the two, right? But whereas we got stuck at, like, no, it's a terrible analogy. Like, so I think, and then when you can't kind of get past that first step, then you can't get to then the next step, right? So I think that's just an example, but I think there's a whole bunch of different examples where. And that's what I mean by not the same page, right?
Yeah, and I guess this goes to my comment that you are treating it with more softer, kind of more favorable confirmation bias than you have with any other topic, because of that's my view.
It's all a matter of your perspective, right? Like, I don't think this is the only conversation like this. I mean, it actually reminds me of the COVID conversation that we had in some ways, because
probably a reverse dynamic of the COVID conversation, to be honest.
Yeah, but I think, like, if the conversation is about, like, fundamentals of truth, like, what is the truth about something, or what is the reality of something, and if you don't have a shared sense of reality, then you kind of struggle to have, like, just as a more meta analysis of, like, what's going on in America right now, right? Like, when you have two sides of America that just have completely different realities, and I think we've got a little microcosm of that here, and maybe less extreme, because I think but I think you there are things that I believe are the truth or are reality that you don't share, right? Like, so
I don't think there's anything fundamental. Like, you couldn't say that, the key things that would drive a vote to Trump are not there. So, for example, I don't believe that Trump won the 2020 election. Therefore, I think all of his claims about them are false, right? A lot of people who vote for Trump may feel that, right? So there could be stuff like that. I don't believe when Trump says this will be the last election ever if we vote in Harris. I don't believe that.
But I think we've already revealed today that like, I don't think you share my view on the danger of Trump. Like, you don't. I think in your view, it's like, the system. You have faith in the system that it'll just wash out. And I don't think. Whilst I think
that's not
that
a fundamental,
might be,
like, black and white thing.
Because I think that's quite core to me. Because, like, for me, I look at institutions, and the chestnut fence is the way I probably would put it, where it's like, you know, like if it sort of ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. Whereas I think Donald Trump is sort of like not just trying to fix it; he's like literally trying to damage something. And I think that matters. Like, and I think sometimes when you damage things, you can't always just repair them after 4 years. Like, I think you've got, like, they have these consequences, or they, you know, the things that have kept good policy making in check.
Yeah, but aren't we just, isn't that an example that we're talking about something that is not a fundamental disagreement? Like, I would have thought, like, whether I believe that Trump is a 0.005% of a catastrophic event and you believe it's 5% or whatever it is, like, that's still, aren't we still on the same team here? Like, isn't that still a grounded reality?
Well, not really, because if the reason why I see Trump as so much more of a danger and a threat than you is because I believe it's 5%, you only believe it's 0.00 or whatever. So in other words, I think it's like 100 times more of a risk than you do. And that risk of that thing happening is literally the thing
we're talking probabilities, Andy.
I'm reacting to.
Like,
right?
I would have thought fundamental truth and stuff is more blatant, like this happened or this didn't happen, not that this will happen, right? Like,
well, we're talking about the future. We're talking about expected value of what the outcome of the world is going to be like, right? So it matters, right? Like, what your expectations for the future are is what you're making your decision now about.
Well,
so
mine's still more based in reality than yours, based on like past performance and everything.
Statements that. No, but your past performance informs your expectations for the future, right? And that's the same for me. Like, I look at Trump's past performance, I've looked at the things he's said, I've looked at his actions, I've looked at everything about him, and I formed my view about what 4 years of Donald Trump could be and what the risks are. And we've got 2 new candidates and
1.5.
It's about the future, right? We're not giving them a score out of 10 based on their past performance. You know, Americans are rating them on whether they want to have more of, you know, it's like they're at the shop and they're deciding, do they want to buy lunch from that sloppy kebab shop again, or do they want to, you know, get a hamburger instead?
Yeah, but it'll be interesting. All I have left to say for this episode is that if one of our listeners are looking for a celebrity death match of the left versus right, or the case for Trump or against Trump by 2 people who are very, very solid communicators and have great clarity of thought and great verbal literacy, unlike Andy and I, then I would highly recommend the Honestly podcast, Trump or Kamala, Ben Shapiro versus Sam Harris debate. Okay, this is something that came out in the last week and is probably the strongest case for each side that I have heard. And the best thing about this episode is you leave the conversation knowing that 2 very intelligent, very capable people can hold diametrically opposed views and have their reasons for it and hold their head up high and leave that podcast studio. And that gave me a lot of faith. And I wish they did it earlier in the cycle. But I highly recommend that. Give that a listen. I'm sure we'll be discussing it in the future as well.
So where are we going to be on Tuesday for all our stalkers? Wednesday.
Shout out to no, I won't. But where will we be? We will be in the Sydney CBD.
Well, we haven't decided yet where we're going to be because we're not actually sure where the action.
Yeah, why'd you bring that up? There's no answer.
All right. Well, all right. Catch you later.
Man, what are we going to do with that?